Good evening to everyone out there. Thanks for joining us in a new virtual format and tuning in to our first ever live webinar. While we miss seeing everyone, we are so happy to have the ability and your interest to continue our lecture series almost as planned in this new mechanism. The team at Keys History and Discovery Center is practicing physical distancing, separated by 6 feet while conducting this seminar, but do know we have limited our time together. I've been working from the museum in my office, while Brad and Aaron spend the majority of time working at their respective homes. Blake Terry, Moat aquarium biologist, continues to maintain the beautiful aquariums. While the museum remains closed, we are working to stay relevant and provide you with some distractions during this unprecedented time. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10 a.m., Brad goes live on Facebook. And on Mondays at 1, Blake with Moat goes live. You don't need to be a Facebook user to tune in. In your search bar, just type Florida Keys History and Discovery Center on Facebook, and our page should appear. And of course, we continue with the lecture series. Upcoming lectures include April 15th, Florida Soul, Music and People That Define Florida Soul. April 29th, Deaths at Indian Key, an unusual Indian attack. May 13th, Environmental Threats to Florida's Iconic Crustaceans. We are so appreciative of all those who have chosen to join, reactivate, upgrade, and refer since the launch of our spring membership drive on March 1st. While our membership drive continues, we are sensitive to the uncertainty facing both our local economy and personal household finances due to the ongoing health crisis. With that in mind, we are extending the time frame of the membership drive and will reschedule at a later date the drawing of our amazing Key West excursion. For those who are able, your continued support and participation in our spring membership drive is greatly appreciated and critical to our sustainability now more than ever. Now, let's hit some housekeeping items with GoToWebinar. You should all see the GoToWebinar viewer, which contains both the presentation slides and the webcam view. If you are on a computer, this is to the left of your screen. If you are viewing on an iPhone, you will need to swipe left and right to switch between the presentation and the presenter. On your computer, the control panel is located to the right. If your control panel collapses, the orange arrow allows you to expand it again. On a tablet or phone, the control features are at the top or top and bottom. If you have a technical question for Aaron or myself during the lecture, you can type that into the questions panel during the presentation. If you have a question for Brad, we ask that you hold these until the question and answer segment at the end. We will review the raise your hand feature at the start of the Q&A segment. Tonight, please know that while we researched and practiced, this format is new to us as it is to many of you. We can't promise there won't be any glitches, but we will do our best. We are working with technology. Now I will introduce the man of the hour, curator, historian, and author, Brad Bertelli. Born in Southern California, Brad moved to Southwest Florida in 1989. After earning his Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the University of Miami in 2001, he moved to the Florida Keys. He is a Florida Keys historian specializing in Upper Keys history and has written 6 books about Florida and Keys history: Snorkeling Florida and Snorkeling the Florida Keys, Key Largo and Islamorada, and 2 books on a local's guides to Bloodline. Brad's observations on Keys history appear weekly in the Upper Keys Marathon and Key West editions of the weekly newspaper in normal times. Welcome, Brad. We look forward to hearing from you.
All right. Thanks for joining in. I have been looking forward to telling this story for a really long time. This is one of my favorite Florida Keys stories, and so there's lots of Butters family relatives in the audience. I'm looking forward to telling your story. Captain Ed and Fern Butters, a love hurricanes and key lime story, which is really it's an amazing love story. It's an amazing love story. So let's talk about Ed and Fern Ed and Fern Butters. We're going to start in 1893, on or about when Charles Edward Butters was born in Michigan, and Fern Dre was born in South Dakota. That date is not set in stone. I'm not real sure when their birthdays are. Some records are fuzzier than others, and this one is one of those. But that's where we're going to start, 1893. Now, Ed and Fern Butters both were married earlier. They both had first marriages. But we're going to jump ahead quickly to late February, early March in 1924. Both Ed and Fern had been traveling to different locations. They did not know each other at this point. And they had been returning home. Ed was coming home to Michigan. Fern was traveling with a school chum of hers. They had been traveling to Kentucky to meet with another friend. And they were all going back home. And they all came back to the Cincinnati train station on a evening. And that evening, they had to stay overnight to catch their connecting train to their prospective homes. And they both ended up staying at the same motel. Now, at this motel, Ed had happened to see a beautiful woman who caught his eye, and while from across the distance, and had tried to, he was kind of a shy guy and tried to catch her attention but couldn't, but he did notice her. So then everyone goes to bed, and in the morning there's a terrible rainstorm, and Fern and her friend had trouble getting to the train station, and by the time they got to their train station, or to this train station, they had missed their connecting train to South Dakota. So they had about 4 hours to kill, and before the next train comes. And Fern's friend wanted to sit in the lounge and kind of relax, but Fern was a people watcher and liked to walk around and view people and kind of watch how things were going. And while she was walking around the train station, a handsome gentleman, tall, handsome gentleman in a military uniform happened to catch her eye. And Ed noticed Fern at the station and again tried to get her attention, but was unable. And he wanted to work up the courage to talk to her, but he couldn't do it. The best thing he could do at the moment was to take a piece of paper and a pencil, and he wrote down his name and his address. And instead of walking over to this pretty young lady and saying hi, introducing himself and presenting his information, he wadded up a piece of paper and put it in his trousers. Fortunately, fate intervened. While Ed is sitting there with his paper and that piece of paper, and Fern is, they're kind of watching each other. There's a young lady who was walking across the Cincinnati Depot, and as she's walking to board her train, her suitcase opens up, and the contents spill out. So both Ed and Fern both kind of rush to the scene, and they help this young lady get her belongings together and get her all packed up. And then she makes her way to her train and is on her way, which means that Ed and Fern are face to face. And Ed says to Fern finally, would you like to have a lemonade? And she says, yes, I would love to. And they go to the lounge and they have a lemonade, and they're chit-chatting and telling about themselves. And about 20 minutes into their conversation, a voice echoes through the speaker system or something and announces that Ed's train is about to leave. So Ed, makes off to his train. Fern goes with him, and as Ed is waiting to board the train, Ed asks, "Can you do me a favor?" And Fern says, "Certainly, if I'm able, I would be happy to." So Ed reaches into his pocket and he pulls out this wadded piece of paper and hands it to her and says, "Can you write me a letter?" And Fern says, I would love to. So she takes, so Ed gets on his train and goes home to Michigan. And then eventually, a couple hours later, Fern and her friend get on their train and they travel to South Dakota. Now, when Fern gets home to South Dakota, she takes that piece of paper with Ed's information and puts it on her bureau in her bedroom and lets it sit for a couple days because she doesn't want to seem too anxious. But after several days, she does write a letter to Ed and waits for her response, which is short, which comes rather quickly. Ed is enthusiastic. A letter arrives special delivery to Fern in South Dakota on day one, on the first day the letter arrives. But it's not the only letter that Ed sends. The next day, a second letter arrives. And on the third day, a third letter arrives, special delivery. And in this third letter, Ed proposes marriage. So after spending 20 minutes together and writing back and forth a little bit, Fern says yes. And they decide to meet in Dixon, Illinois on, I want to say May 3rd, 1924. May 13th, 1924. The two meet in Dixon and they become married after about 2.5 months from first meeting. Now, from this point forward, Ed and Fern spend a little bit of time. They go to Indianapolis where Ed's parents live, and they live with the Butters for a little while. They go to South Dakota for a little bit of time and stay with the Dre family. But this is also the Great Depression years. And work is hard to find. But there is a land boom in South Florida. And Ed and Fern, as well as Ed's parents, decide to come to South Florida and seek work. Ed is in construction, so he's a construction worker, and he ends up coming to South Florida. They live in the Little River area of Miami, and Ed finds work, construction work, building the Miami-Dade Courthouse. Now, Ed is working, making friends. He is also, these are the Prohibition years, and he is also one who likes to brew his own home mix and has a little still at his house. And in September 18th, I believe, he has set up all his bottles to fill on the kitchen table so he can fill up the bottles and bring some of his hooch to the guys he works with at the construction site. But September 18th is also the date that the Great Miami Hurricane strikes. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, all hell breaks loose. The wind is screaming. There are some panels outside the house that are slamming against the door, against the building, and it wakes them up. And they have a daughter. Ed has a daughter from a previous marriage, Loretta. And Loretta is screaming, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning. And this is a picture of the Category 4 1926 hurricane, which was amazing, very destructive, tons of damage. But this is a quote from Fern. Our daughter Loretta started screaming and became hysterical. By the time we got her quieted, some clothes on us all, and everyone but me outside, that house sailed off into the air like a bird on a wing. I got caught between the house and the screen door. Fern is knocked unconscious, and Ed is calling out for her, and they do end up safe outside. They crawl to a pump that's in the yard, and they're clinging to the pump, and Ed is practically sitting on top of them to keep them safe. Now, the dangerous part about this story is that there are so many avenues, and I don't want to, there's so many great parts of the story to tell. I don't want to get too lost in some of the great outer stories with the limited amount of time that we have. So the hurricane passes. actually the eye of the hurricane comes, and Ed and Fern, this is their first hurricane. They don't understand how hurricanes work, but suddenly the eye of the storm comes across, and the wind stops and the rain stops, and Ed and Fern and Loretta get into their car, and they're going to find Ed's family to check on them. As they're driving, suddenly the rain and the wind comes back up, and Ed takes his car and drives into a grapefruit orchard and backs his car up to a grapefruit tree. And another couple in a coupe kind of followed in the same thing, and they end up staying for hours inside this car as the hurricane rages around them. And at the end, there's only 2 trees standing in the orchard of the grove, and that is the tree that Ed and Fern and the family are backed up into in their car, and the tree that the coupe, the other family, had followed Ed and done. So they survive. This is not their last hurricane to deal with. Now, October passes, November passes, things are getting back in order. And one of the things, there is a bridge being built during the construction of the early phase of the State Road 4A, which would become the Overseas Highway, the bridge that would link mainland Florida to Key Largo, the Card Sound Bridge. And the storm washes out this first version of the bridge. It's a swing bridge. And when it was repaired, it's raised 7 or 8 feet. And according to Fern, the bridge reopens on November 11th, 1926. Now, shortly after that, another couple who they're friendly with invite Ed and Fern down to go to Key Largo for a little fishing adventure. And Ed loves to fish. They come down for the weekend. The 4 of them packed into a car. They come down. They're camping. They're fishing. Ed is just loving the Keys, Key Largo. And on the way back, Ed can't help but stop talking about how I just want to open a fishing camp, and if this comes true, Fern, I will make you a little motel restaurant where you'll be able to serve sandwiches and desserts just like you've always wanted to. And Fern hears this. A couple of days later, they're back home. Ed's back at work at the courthouse, and Fern is walking down Flagler Avenue in Miami, and she walks past a real estate office, and in the window it says Key Largo Properties for sale. So Fern enters the building, enters the office, and when she walks out, she has signed on the dotted line and purchased a piece of Key Largo property. It's about 25 feet by 90 feet. Fern describes it as pie-shaped. It borders the road that connects the first version of the Overseas Highway, State Road 4A, that connects the Card Sound Bridge access of Florida, of Key Largo to the rest of Key Largo. And Fern is excited, and she walks back to the courthouse, flags down her husband, and says, "Honey, I bought us some property." And Ed is excited. He immediately takes 2 weeks off from his work at the courthouse, and he first he orders $600 worth of lumber to be shipped to their lot in Key Largo. He hires a couple of helpers, and he comes down to the Keys and builds a little motel restaurant. And it becomes the Key Inn. It opens in December 1926. And this is the picture of it. It's located about, if you're in North Key Largo and you're on the Card Sound Road exit today, about the Gulf Shore Drive area. It's a couple miles past mile marker 108 or 106. But according to Fern's diary, which is really amazing, she says, "I made pale yellow sateen curtains and bought unpainted tables and chairs to seat 36 people. I painted the tables and chairs a pastel sea green The tablecloths and napkins I made were white. Now, you can imagine bugs were horrific in those days. So when you entered their little restaurant and hotel, first they squirted you down with the mosquito powder, but they also, which would never happen today, on every table, the 9 tables in the restaurant, on every table was a little dish filled with DDT. Would not fly today. But so we're in December now, and the Fern Inn is open, and on Fern's first meal is served at the restaurant. She serves roast chicken, she serves roast beef, roast beef, and also coconut cream pie and apple pie. Fern loves to cook. She's an amazing baker. And after the end of service, some of the guests asked for a fish option for next Sunday. So she listens, okay, and on the next Sunday, there's 26 people who show up for dinner. Now, about this time, Fern decides to goes out and explores kind of the surrounding area around her lot. And she comes upon some key lime trees that are growing on the surrounding area. And she takes her apron and she fills picks a bunch of limes and fills the limes and begins to experiment with making lime, in those days just called lime pie. And what she says is, they were so good. I made lime pies like the old-fashioned lemon pie. When I wasn't too busy during the week, I kept using the lime to make different kinds of pies until I came up with one I thought was good. And if there's one thing that is the thread that links the rest of this story together, is her famous, world famous really, key lime pie, which she began serving as early as 1926. It had been served earlier in Key West, but this is probably one of the first people in the Upper Keys to serve key lime pie, or lime pie as it would have been called, to the public. Now, as Fern and Ed, they're working, they're continuing to build. At first there were outhouses, so he builds some indoor restrooms, he builds some office space, a reception area, and people are beginning to drive down and stop at Fern's place because, you know, it's a great place to stop and have a clean bed, but also because she was getting a reputation for her excellent meals and her delicious desserts. Now, one of her early fans, was a gentleman known as Thomas Edison, who lived in Fort Myers at that time. And once the Tamiami Trail, the road that linked Tampa Bay to Miami, cut across the Everglades, Thomas Edison and his wife and some other friends would frequently or periodically come down into Key Largo to. He was, if you've ever visited Thomas Edison's estate in Fort Myers, big into agriculture and plants. So he was collecting plants, and he always stopped, and Fern always noticed or said that he always took a nap for 90 minutes, never longer, never late, never less. And he became a family, they became friends. So on one visit, Thomas Edison brings Fern a present. And while this is a sweet potato, the plant that is gifted to Fern is described as a root that looks like a sweet potato, so I brought this from home. And he said that if you plant it, it'll grow as a vine and it will burst into beautiful lime-colored flowers. So Fern did plant the root, and it grew and it grew, and it ended up covering. We go back to this picture. You can see how that's a picture of the Edison vine growing all over the front of the Key Inn, but it never bloomed. And you know, she thinks about this, and it's odd because it's been a couple years and it hasn't bloomed. But then something really extraordinary happened. The day that Thomas Edison died, October 18th, 1931, the very same day, that plant burst into just tons of lime-colored flowers. And there are stories that call this the Edison miracle vine. But it was just one of those really wacky things that happens. And Thomas Edison, of course, is not the last famous person or a person of notoriety to visit the Butters at the Key Inn. There's a gentleman named Al Capone who moves to Miami in 1928. And this is during the Prohibition years. And there is a day that Ed is out front of the building, and he is at this point has installed some gas tank, or not tanks, but places to fill up your car, be able to fill up your car, drawing a blank here. But this roadster comes over the bridge and stops at the Butters place. They get some gas, and it's Al Capone with a couple of associates. Jack Butters, one of their sons. There were three children, Jack and Chester, who were both adopted, and then I can't remember the daughter's name, who was from Ed's first marriage. But Jack remembers seeing two Tommy guns propped up in the back of the roadster. And one of the associates with Capone says, "This is Al Capone. We want to use your dock to bring in liquor for us, and we will give you $25 a load." And Ed Butters says, "No, I'm not going to allow that to happen on my property." And the associate says, no one says no to Al Capone. Don't you know who you're talking to?" And Ed says, "I don't care," turns his back, walks away. And as Fern is watching this unfold, she thought for sure that that was the last time she was going to see her husband. But Ed walked away. Capone and his associates got back in the car, went on their way, and that was the last they heard of Al Capone. Now, in 1932, the Butters, Ed and Fern, decided to sell the Key Inn. And they sold to Mabel Harris from Chicago. And the Key Inn now becomes known as Mabel's Place. And Mabel's Place still offered a fine kitchen, conch chowder and key lime pie, and also nice beds to sleep in. But they also offered other amenities, including gambling, drinks that are, a little stronger than the law allows. But as the picture on the right indicates, also some female companionship for those who are lonely and on the road. Now Mabel Harris had a hard time keeping up with business, wrote a letter home to Chicago asking for additional help, and her brother came down from Chicago to assist Mabel running the business. And he is Harry Harris, who becomes a huge fixture in Upper Keys and Monroe County politics, which is a whole different story that we'll get into on a different lecture day. But now Mabel's Place is operating up in North Key Largo, and Ed and Fern decide to move south. Now, about 1925, oops, hold on a second. Now here's some postcards that show Mabel's Place, but so you get kind of see how it looks. The line says famous for lime pies and conch chowder. You can kind of see the outside of it. Here's a picture of the inside of the restaurant that Ed built. Very small, very compact. Of course, there's fish on the wall because you can't go into a restaurant in the Florida Keys and not see a fish on the wall. And then here's the kitchen. Oops. Here's the kitchen. And they're advertising they're famous for crawfish or lobster dinners, but also turtle steaks. Now, Ed and Fern decide to move south. And they have their eyes on another property. And the property they have their eye on is one called the Russell Arms. That was built 1925 by a couple of brothers from Key West, Doddridge and Burnell Russell. And don't laugh, Aaron, you make me lose my who come up and build this large motel on the side of State Road 4A, which become Overseas Highway. And this is another picture of 1925. You can see kind of this is the Overseas Highway, early version of it, in 1925, as they're still building this. Now there are 2 train depots on Upper Matecumbe Key, which is where this hotel is today, the heart of Islamorada. But on the left-hand corner, you can barely make out some telephone poles, and that is where the railroad line is coming down. So right across from the hotel is the Matecumbe Depot, which is the second of the 2 depots on Upper Matecumbe Key. In those days, Islamorada was just a small community a couple miles up the road. The old timers who lived on Upper Matecumbe Key, this original community was called Matecumbe. Now in 1927, there is an advertisement that shows up in the newspaper advertising the Russell Arms Hotel in Miami News. The Russell Arms Hotel, Matecumbe Key, home of the Bonefish, a modern 27-room hotel built near what is now the temporary terminus of the Overseas Highway. Sand beach bathing, deep sea fishing, up-to-date dining, room service, seafood is specialty, ideally located for weekend patrons from Miami and Homestead. Summer rates, $550 a day, $33.50 a week. Prices have gone up a tad since those days. Now, that's 1927. They're probably doing a pretty brisk business. Fishing has already become a big deal in the Upper Keys, especially because by 1927, you were able to drive your car from Miami all the way to Upper Matecumbe Key. There was a complete road. From that point forward, things became a little more difficult to get to Key West, but again, that's a whole different lecture. But in 1932, Ed and Fern decide to purchase the Matecumbe Hotel, or the Russell Arms. They spend $80,000, which is a pretty steep price for the time. We're again in the Great Depression, and they rename the Russell Arms Hotel the Hotel Matecumbe, or the Matecumbe Hotel, depending on which side of the building you're looking at, and we'll talk about that in a second. But one of the first things that Fern does is, at the Russell Arms, they were offering gambling. And the first thing that she did was she cleared out all the gaming tables in the hotel and made more room for tables to serve for the kitchen for her food. Now, this is a picture of the spruced up Hotel Matecumbe. On the side of the building to the right, there it says Hotel Matecumbe, but the front, as you can see, this is Fern welcoming a guest, and the marquee behind her says Matecumbe Hotel. Now, at the hotel, there was also a dock that was built up on the ocean where Ed was offering charter boat fishing. And one of Ed's, the first charter boat captain that Ed hired to help him out was, this is a picture of the dock. You can see Matecumbe Hotel, and a picture of the day's catch. A lot of barracuda, shark, sailfish, marlin looks like. That's another sailfish. Anyways, one of the first charter boat captain he hired was at this point a kid named Bill Smith, or a young man named Bill Smith, Captain Bill Smith. And Bill Smith would become super famous, a local legendary fishing guide for different reasons, several years down the road. But he would bring guests out fishing. He would pay the Butters, a percentage of his take, but he would also help serve food for the Butters, for the guests, help clean up, help serve food, and help around the hotel. Now in 1934, the World War I veterans began coming down here to build a solid bridge system, and a lot of the higher ups use the Matecumbe Hotel as a meeting place. And during one dinner, it turns out that they're looking for a nighttime security guard for one of the work camps on Lower Matecumbe. Bill Smith takes the job, and he ends up working nights at Lower Matecumbe, and that's his night job. So he's got two jobs now. But where things really start to take a turn was September 2nd, 1935, when the most powerful hurricane to ever strike North America has been brewing out in the Atlantic and is coming for shore. Now the locals know that something is going on because barometers readings are dropping. This is in those days, the communication of a storm coming in is not what it is today. The storm is kind of out there in the Atlantic. It's very small. They're not sure where it is. They're not sure where it's going. The Weather Bureau thinks it's going to go between Key West and the Dry Tortugas, 100 miles to the south. But the locals know something's coming because the barometer is dropping and people know what's going on. But so on September 2nd, 1935, Ed does his best to, pack up the windows, put boards over the windows, and then takes his son Jack, and they go to Miami to work on a boat, a new fishing boat they've got, and they get some supplies. And Ed and Jack are up in Miami, and at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the Weather Bureau announces that there is a powerful storm coming to the Matecumbe area. Now this is 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the day of the hurricane, and this is the first time that they're getting a firm, the storm is coming, something's happening. So Ed dips into a hotel, calls Fern at the hotel, and as they're talking on the phone, Fern is doing her best to be calm and not to upset or alert her husband. And then she says, when Ed asks how because the wind's picking up and the boards are slamming against the side of the building, and Ed says, how are things there? And Fern says, well, if you want to know the truth, it's blowing like hell here. This alerted Ed because Fern did not use that kind of language. So he said, honey, I'm on my way, packs up his son, gets in the car, and they beeline for Upper Matecumbe. And it takes several hours to reach here. Yeah, that's where we are. Now, Ed arrives around 5 in the afternoon, and the wind is howling, and at about 6 o'clock, Fern writes, I never knew a howling, raging wind to come so fast. At 6 o'clock, we were forced to leave the hotel. We heard crashing and noise from the hotel, and a piece of the building blew down and landed beside the left front wheel of the car. We watched it anxiously, fearing it might blow into the car. So now they have abandoned the hotel and they're in their car again during a hurricane, and they backed the car up against the hotel. So they're trying to feel safe there, but the storm is increasing, water's raising, and their plan is to get to the highest section, which is the railroad line, thinking that the train's going to come down there and evacuate everybody. But as they start to form a linking arms and make their way across to the railroad track, Ed takes a step in the water and steps on a nail and puts it into his foot, and he turns back to his wife and says, I can't go any further. So they end up going into there had been a tourist bus that had been left behind the hotel, and they are in the bus, and they survive the hurricane. It's a devastating storm. This is a picture of the hotel. On the next day, you can see where it says Hotel Matecumbe. Here's another picture from the back looking towards the train. It's not a great picture, but you can see how this building has been devastated. And this is another aerial view showing and how deserted it is here in the Keys at that point. And all that dust in there that you see, those are fires that are burning. Now, going back to Captain Bill Smith, he ended up staying, riding the storm out on this boat, the quarter boat Sarasota, on Lower Matecumbe, and it's crazy. I mean, the storm was responsible for killing as many as 500 people, perhaps more. No one knows the number for sure. Hundreds here in on this island, Upper Matecumbe Key and Lower Matecumbe Key. But he rides the storm out on this quarter boat, and everyone on the boat survives. Several years later, Bill Smith ends up making legendary history by becoming the first person to catch a bonefish using a fly, and that is actually a picture of him, the fly that he used, and the bonefish that he caught, which was 8 pounds, here off of Upper Matecumbe Key. Again, a different story. So we'll move forward. Now, as you can imagine, after surviving the great Miami Hurricane 1926, the Labor Day Hurricane 1935, a Category 4 hurricane, and then a Category 5 hurricane, they've escaped their lives twice by sheer luck. So they, as you might think, have had it with the Keys, and their good friend Al Pfluger Sr. up in the Fort Lauderdale area, and the Butters have lost everything. He has an extra truck. He loans the Butters. He has a place for them to stay, a house, and they ended up staying up in Fort Lauderdale area for a while, Dania Beach, that area, I believe. They opened up another restaurant for a brief period of time, and then they moved from there to Youngstown, Ohio, and they work at a large park. The restaurant seats 1,000 people, much bigger operation than they're used to. Ed has, at this point, decides one day, packs up and says to the wife and the kids, "We're leaving today, pack your stuff, we're leaving." And they go out to California and live in Long Beach, where I was born, by the way, in the late 1930s, early 1940s. They visit some family. They park a trailer in the yard, and they live in Long Beach for several years. Now, about 1945, they still own property on Upper Matecumbe Key, where the Hotel Matecumbe was destroyed. That's still their property, and they come back to Upper Matecumbe Key, and they build the Fern Inn. And this is the picture of the Fern Inn. It's on Upper Matecumbe Key, and again, it becomes the place for, there's a restaurant, there's some hotel rooms. Again, she is, making food, cooking her desserts. Her key lime pie is now becoming world famous. There is even a restaurant chain who offers her $1,500 for her recipes. She says no. And this is another picture of the Fern Inn. Probably looks like in the 50s. And then at one point, Harry Truman and his wife are staying down in Key West. And Ed and Fern bakes a key lime pie, gives it to Ed, and says, "You drive this down to Key West and deliver it to the Trumans." So Ed puts it on the seat of his truck and drives down to Key West and hands it off. Goes down to the little White House and delivers it to the Trumans. And then Bess Truman sends this letter back to Ms. Butters. "You were very kind to send us this beautiful and delicious pie. This variety is a great treat to us Midwesterners. We deeply appreciate your generous thought of us. We are hoping to drop in someday soon for lunch. Sincerely, Bess Truman." And sadly, sometime later, the love of her life, Ed Butters, dies on January 31st, 1964. And Fern is left running the business by herself. After a couple years, she sells the business to Manny and Isa Ortiz. And along with the sale of the restaurant, Fern's key lime pie recipe is included with the sale. And Fern decides she likes to work, and she actually ends up coming here to the Islander Motel. And there is a small restaurant at the Islander called the Dining Room. And she ends up managing the dining room. I'm sure she is still making her key lime pie and serving it. And she works there for several years. And then Fern Butters herself passes on March 17th, 1975. And that is a picture of her grandson, Pete Perdue, another local fishing guide of renown. And since then, the Fern Inn, which the building still stands, has been home to a myriad of restaurants. It has been remodeled since. When you look at it today, it has most recently been home to Reefer's Gastropub, which just closed a couple weeks ago. But this whole front portion, this whole front part of the building has actually been added on to the original building. And if you step around to the side, you can see where the original building was and then where this additional place was. And I think we're going to wrap up this portion of our talk and open it up to any questions you might have.
All right. Thank you so much, Brad, for that wonderful presentation. And we're going to go ahead and begin our question and answer portion. This is Erin Muir, and I'm going to be moderating for you this evening. If you would like to ask a question, you may use your raise hand button. I will be able to see everyone who has a hand raised and will call on you to ask your question. When I call on you, I will unmute your microphone. When I do this, you should get a notification that says something along the lines of, the organizer has unmuted you. Do you want to unmute? And select yes. If you don't see this notification, you can always check your mute status by looking at your microphone button. If there's a slash line through it, you are muted, or if it's red. A microphone with no slash and green on many devices means your mic is on for everyone to hear. If someone else asks your question or you change your mind about asking your question, hit your raise hand button again and it will lower your virtual hand. Or you can always type in your question in the questions panel like we reviewed at the start of the webinar, and I will read your question to Brad. All right, let's give this a shot. So I'm going to go to a question that has been typed in by Dozier Shaw. And the question is, can you talk about how the elevated railroad bed caused more deaths during the hurricane by raising the water levels on the island?
Great question. Now, one of the problems when Flagler built his railroad, today when you drive from Upper Matecumbe to Lower Matecumbe, you go over several bridges. When Flagler built his railroad, he did not use bridges. What he did is essentially build a dam between Upper Matecumbe and Lower Matecumbe. Now, prior to Flagler coming in, there was a free exchange of water between Florida Bay and the Atlantic Ocean. The water could come in and could flow around the islands. Now, because he used railroad fill instead of bridges, the water was unable to flow freely and built up and built up and built up, which is one of the reasons why an 18-foot wall of water crashed over the Matecumbe Keys. And what the locals who survived the storm said, that once that railroad fill broke free, it was like pulling the plug on a sink full of water, where the water just moved away quickly. So that was Flagler is partly responsible for part of the for the death and destruction, some of the destruction of the 200-mile-an-hour winds, a lot of water, but it was partly because Flagler did choose to use a dam essentially and not bridges between those two islands. Hope that answers your question.
Okay, we're going to go to Roman butters next. I have 2 Roman butters listed on here, so I'm not sure which one I'm unmuting right now. But go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, Brad. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, Roman.
How are you, buddy?
Thank you. Very good. And thank you for your donation. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome very much. Yeah, on behalf of the Butters family, we'd like to say thank you for all that you have done and all that you continually still do for the Florida Keys Discovery Center. It's awesome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. The question I got is, do we know if the Edison vine is still endemic down in the Keys? What is it still down there? Where is that thing?
All right, so here's the thing about that. We don't know what it was. All we know from Edison was that it looked like the root looked like a sweet potato. Now I know when Ed and Fern left the Key Inn up in North Key Largo, they cut off some of it and planted it behind the Hotel Matecumbe. And apparently it grew there for a while. I don't know what kind of plant it was. I don't think it's still there. I'm not sure if it's even it might have been something he brought from Fort Myers from his own botanical garden. That's probably where it came from. So we don't know what it was. All we know is that the root looked like a sweet potato. It had lime green flowers, and I was trying to Google something to look that was similar. Couldn't find anything, but my father-in-law lives in Cape Coral. So I think next time we're over there, we'll go to the Edison Museum and see if someone there might know. And if I know how to get a hold of all you guys. So if I find out, I will definitely tell you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm sure it's still down there growing somewhere. But again, thank you, Brad, for everything. We appreciate it, buddy.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you for all the Butters who all of your family has been so helpful and so giving to us. And thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, next we're going to go to Connie Miller. Connie Miller, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
I got it. Okay, here I
Excellent.
am. Okay, I'm assuming that Pete Perdue's mother was Loretta Butters?
Olin Perdue, I believe, was the father. And
Yes.
Mary, yes,
Married Loretta?
correct. And they had Pete was their son.
Yes, okay, thank you.
You're welcome. That was a different Loretta. That wasn't the Loretta from born in 1913 from Ed's first marriage. It was a daughter, a subsequent daughter.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take another question that has been typed in from Donna Quincy. When was the last year Fern was at the Fern Inn?
1967.
All right, that was an easy answer.
That's when they sold to Manny and Isa, who took over, and then Fern retired for a brief period of time, and then became the Islander Resort and began managing their coffee shop dining room.
All right, now we are going to go to Mary Lou Rubin for a question. Mary Lou, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Since Manny and Isa retired, who is making Fern's famous key lime pie now?
That is an interesting question. I don't know who. I know a couple places advertise Manny and Isa's key lime pie. No one advertises Fern Butters key lime pie. I believe Mangrove Mike's has their Manny and Isa's pies. I'm not positive. But Manny Isa became famous herself, and that's what most people today remember as for the key lime pie. But I know Rich Russell, who was our board president, remembers eating at Fern's place and then going back and eating at Isa's place afterwards, and said that this pie tastes really a lot like Butters pie. But I'm not sure who is making Fern's even commercial. I'm sure some of the Butters family are doing it. But I know that Fern kept her recipe secret, and she would not always give out her secret ingredient to everybody that asked for it. I'm not positive what that ingredient was. It might have been ice cream, not a frozen pie, but used ice cream in the mix, melted ice cream in the mix.
Okay, so we have another question along the same lines that's been submitted. And I believe you've answered part of it already, asking if Manny and Issa's, this is from Donna Quincy, if Manny and Issa's served Fern's famous recipe, which I think you covered, yes, that was sold with the business. And is the recipe available? And I can actually answer that because it is available in a cookbook we sell in our retail area here at the museum. It's listed under Manny and Issa's key lime pie, but that is something that we have available here if you're interested. I can't give you quite the title off the top of my head, but just give us a shout. And I have the cookbook, and that's the recipe I use, and it's fantastic.
Now, I do think that Manny had a different crust recipe. I think the crust was his, because he worked at the Green Turtle prior to buying Fern out, and I know that he had his own recipe. I believe that he had a different recipe for his crust, but I'm not positive.
Go ahead and go to one more question that's been submitted by Mary Jo Kisco. Where was the Russell Arms located?
The Russell Arms located at what is today the Reefer's Gastropub. That last slide I showed of the purple building, that is where the Russell Arms was, and that then became the Hotel Matecumbe, destroyed in the 1935 hurricane. Ed and Fern came back in the mid-1940s and built the Fern Inn, which is today operating, and that building still stands. So that's where the Russell Arms and the Matecumbe Hotel still would have stayed, right there in Upper Matecumbe, right next to the Moose Lodge, right across from Morada Bay, and next to the Moose Lodge.
All right. I have not seen any additional questions that have been submitted. Oh, wait, no, we have one more hand.
All right.
Marie DeLuca, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I was always curious, you know where the Whistle Stop shopping center is, the Whistle Stop bar?
Absolutely.
Was that a train station?
It was not.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, there were two depots on Upper Matecumbe Key. One across from where the Butters store was, restaurant was, and the other one is where today the post office is. And that's pretty much exactly where the original train depot was. I think it's on the corner of De Leon Avenue and Overseas Highway.
All right.
All right. I will add one more thing. Tomorrow night at 9 o'clock on the Discovery Channel. Over the summer, I filmed for a new show called Rob Riggle, Global Investigator, all about the pirate Black Caesar, and that's going to be airing tomorrow night. So if you want to see me again on a more accessible TV, we'll be talking about the pirate Black Caesar at 9 o'clock-ish.
And I've got just a couple more notes before we sign off for the evening. First, I'd like to thank our members, Stephen and Christina Pierce. They are two extremely tech-savvy individuals who were instrumental in helping us set up this platform, as well as the hardware needed to implement all of this. This lecture has been recorded, and we will upload it to our YouTube channel, and we'll be sharing it to our Facebook page as well. Tomorrow, you all will receive a follow-up email that includes a brief survey about your experience with tonight's lecture. We would love for you to complete that survey. If you are on our email list, you will receive an email with the registration link for our upcoming lecture on Wednesday, April 15th, the Monday before that lecture. Registration links are also on our website, keysdiscovery.com, and will be added to our Facebook page. Thank you so much to each and every one of you who has participated with us this evening. I'd like to leave you with one final thought about the Keys History and Discovery Center. An underlying theme that runs through the exhibits in our museum is resiliency. Whether it's the resiliency of the people who came before us, who survived shipwrecks, lights, and hurricanes, or the resiliency of our unique ecosystems we fight to protect. As our community works through our current challenges, these stories of resiliency take on added significance. We are confident that not only will we persevere in this fight against the invisible enemy of disease, but that the Keys History and Discovery Center will be here to chronicle this most recent chapter in our collective story. Jill, Brad, and I look forward to welcoming you all back to the museum as soon as we are able. Thank you for your continued engagement and shared commitment to our mission. I hope you all have a great evening, and don't forget to tune in to Brad's Facebook Live tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.